In just 11 seconds, Pete Hegseth launched a racial slur on live national television. "Your blood ain't American." The room froze. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She reached for a folded flag that had been waiting 78 years for justice. What kind of truth makes a U.S. veteran's granddaughter go silent? Just long enough to break the system wide open. It was supposed to be just another oversight, hearing routine rehearsed wrapped in procedure. But the moment Pete Hegseth walked in, the air changed. Not shifted, tightened. Like someone had wrapped barbed wire around the room and dared it to breathe. He scanned the panel like a man counting enemies. His suit was sharp, his stare sharper. Cameras were already rolling red tally lights, blinking like warning signs. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm, unreadable, and entirely unarmed. At least that's what they thought. Pete leaned in, not toward the mic, but toward her, as if to make it personal. His mouth curled and he fired a sentence so toxic it didn't echo, it detonated. "Your blood ain't American." The room didn't gasp. It held its breath. CNN cut to a tight frame. Fox froze their ticker. MSNBC killed the B-roll. Within 90 seconds, "Your blood ain't American" was trending at 3 nationwide. Over 2.3 million viewers tuned in live. Some gasped, others just stared. For the first time all morning, America didn't scroll. It held its breath. Staffers froze mid-scribble. Phones stopped recording out of disbelief, not choice. Even the marble columns seemed to lean in, like they couldn't believe what they just heard. Pete reclined like a man who just planted a flag on enemy soil. His fingers' interlaced elbows spread gaze, daring anyone to call it what it was. He looked satisfied, like he'd scored a kill without firing a gun. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her only response was terrifying in its quiet. She slid one hand across the polished wood, resting it gently on a slim leather folder. It wasn't just a folder. It was a fuse. And as the networks held their breath and the nation leaned closer, the unspoken question roared across every living room. What's buried deep enough to make a woman answer? Racism not with rage, but with silence. The silence didn't fade. It deepened, like someone had dropped the temperature in the room 10 degrees. Lawmakers sat frozen pens hovering midair. Even the stenographer's fingers hovered above the keys, unsure whether to type or tremble. The insult still hung there, undigested, acidic, alive. In newsrooms across the country, producers barked, "Go full screen." Chirons were rewritten in real time. Social feeds went from idle to inferno in under 60 seconds. Boomers in Midwestern kitchens put down their coffee. Vietnam vets in recliners straightened their backs. Black mothers with folded flags on their mantles felt something twist in their chest. Across 50 states, millions of eyes locked on one woman and waited. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't give Pete Hegseth the reaction he wanted. No anger, no fire, just that same stillness, the kind that made people nervous. Her hand stayed on the folder like it was warm, like it remembered something no one else in the room was ready to know. She wasn't quiet because she didn't have a response. She was quiet because she was choosing which truth to unleash first. Pete leaned back deeper in his chair, smug as ever, like he'd won, like silence was surrender. But that was his mistake. He didn't understand that for some people, silence is the sharpest weapon in the room. Jasmine's silence wasn't fear, it was pressure, and it was building. Cameras zoomed in so tight you could see the curve of her brow, the barely tense line of her jaw. The folder hadn't opened. The flag hadn't been shown. The name hadn't been said. Not yet. And still America gasped. Not because they'd heard something outrageous, but because they felt it. Something old, something buried, something about to surface. And when it did, who would still be standing? The chairman cleared his throat, but his voice barely pierced the tension. Jasmine calmly leaned forward, thumb pressing the mic button with the kind of precision reserved for surgical incisions or pulling a trigger. No hesitation, no wasted breath, just one sentence that landed like a crack in marble. "You insulted my blood. Let me show you what it cost." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The weight of her words pulled the room to the edge. Then slowly she reached into the leather folder. No rush, no theatrics. Just a movement so deliberate it felt like time slowed to watch. Out came a single black and white photograph, folded once then again, edges worn like it had survived wars of its own. She laid it face up on the table with the care of someone setting down a family's last remaining truth. The image, a young black soldier in uniform standing on a foreign shore rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes defiant and mouth solemn. A man captured not by ceremony, but by duty. Pete's smirk flickered. Just for a moment. He didn't look at the photo. Not yet. But something in his jaw tightened. Jasmine didn't look at him. She looked straight ahead into the cameras, into the country. Her voice came low, even and without a tremble. "This is Clarence Crockett, my grandfather. U.S. Army 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. He landed at Utah Beach on D-Day and never made it home." The room didn't move. The nation didn't breathe. Pete didn't speak, but his silence was no longer confident. It was calculating. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he questioned her bloodline, he opened a vault sealed with sacrifice. And inside was a name that would haunt him on every screen across America. Who was Clarence Crockett, and why was Pete about to regret ever asking? Jasmine didn't lift the photo. She let it sit there like testimony, undeniable, unblinking. Her eyes remained locked forward, voice steady but heavy, each syllable carrying the weight of a name this country had forgotten far too easily. My grandfather Clarence Crockett fought on D-Day. Not in a movie, not in a textbook. In flesh, in sand, in silence. The image stared back at Pete, but she wasn't speaking to him anymore. She was speaking to the nation, to every kitchen with a folded flag no one asked for, to every cemetery that buried courage beneath red tape. He was part of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, the only all-black unit on Utah Beach. He carried a rifle, but history carried a blindfold. No medal ever arrived, no headline, no proper grave. When Clarence was gunned down dragging wounded soldiers out of machine gun fire, white soldiers, his body wasn't returned. His wife received no funeral, no casket, no ceremony. Just a triangle of folded cloth in a box smaller than his boots. He died saving men who didn't look like him. Jasmine continued, her voice tightening. 2 of them wrote letters to my grandmother. The U.S. government never did. The chamber had no words. Even Pete's hands were still now. Because what Jasmine was laying out wasn't politics. It was proof, and it couldn't be debated. She looked down at the photo just once, then back at the committee. His name never made it to Arlington. It didn't even make it to the wall, but it made it here through me. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman. She was a granddaughter bearing witness. A generation finally speaking the name history tried to bury. And that name, Clarence Crockett, was no longer silent. Jasmine didn't sit down. Her fingers reached into the folder again, slower this time, as if she were lifting something ancient. What came next wasn't a headline. It was a memory sealed in yellowed paper. She unfolded it with care, then held it up for the room and the nation to see. This letter was written in 1946. It was never sent. Gasps stirred in the gallery. Even reporters leaned in, pencils forgotten in their hands. Jasmine read the words aloud, not with fire, but with something colder, deeper. Private Clarence Crockett shielded my father from mortar fire near Argenton, France. My father was unconscious. He dragged him through 300 yards of open field alone. My family never forgot Clarence. We just never said it. The letter was signed by a Major Charles Rusk, a white soldier's son. It had sat in a drawer for 80 years, locked in guilt, in fear and silence. Jasmine paused. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They sent it to me last week, after watching Pete Hegseth say my blood wasn't American. The room tensed. Pete's stare didn't shift, but his jawline twitched, subtle, defensive. Because this wasn't a partisan ambush. It was a reckoning. The kind built not on outrage, but on receipts. Jasmine looked around, gaze sweeping the committee like a quiet indictment. America didn't forget my grandfather's name by accident. It erased it because it didn't fit the story it wanted to tell. She placed the letter beside the photo on the desk, 2 truths long, buried now side by side. And with them, she'd pulled open a wound no press statement could patch. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in Washington is a name history tried to silence, finally speaking for itself. Jasmine didn't rush. She reached beneath the desk, her hand emerging with a small velvet-wrapped box, dark blue edges, frayed seams worn with time. She placed it on the table like a relic, not a prop. Camera zoomed in. No one blinked. You could hear the soft latch click open across every live stream in America. Inside lay a folded American flag, tight, precise, triangle-shaped. The stars faced upward, pressed flat beneath fabric older than most of the men in the room. She didn't touch it at first, just looked. Her voice came low and unshaken. This is all my grandmother received. No funeral, no casket, no headstone. Just this. A pause. Not dramatic, necessary. She let the flag breathe. Let the silence wrap around it like a shroud. They didn't send back his body. They didn't even send back his boots. Just this triangle, wrapped in myth, empty of memory. Pete's face was stone, but his confidence cracked along the edges. He didn't dare interrupt. Not now. Because Jasmine wasn't arguing. She was revealing. She wasn't debating. She was mourning for a war hero whose country honored the headline, but buried the man. She slid the flag closer to the center of the table between herself and Pete. You questioned my blood, but this flag soaked it before it ever touched your boots. The silence returned, not stunned, but reverent. Across the country, living rooms grew still. Veterans stared at the screen. Mothers of fallen sons felt something tighten. Because this wasn't about policy anymore. It was about proof. And folded neatly into that triangle was the one question no one in power ever wants to answer. What does a country owe a man it never buried? The flag still lay between them when Jasmine opened the folder. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, not when the numbers were about to scream. Her hand moved with surgical calm, sliding a new set of papers across the lacquered table. They didn't flutter. They landed like a verdict. $78 million, she said, each syllable, slow, deliberate. Approved last year for minority veteran services, and gone. A large display lit up behind her black map, red zones glowing like open wounds. Cities like Baltimore, St. Louis, South Dallas, all marked. Jasmine stepped aside so the nation could see the truth for itself. These were the districts slated to receive care, trauma counseling medical clinics, suicide prevention programs. Not a single one broke ground. Pete tilted his head arms, crossed lips curling into a half smile. We reprioritized, he muttered loud enough for the mic to catch to soft enough to sound civilized. Jasmine didn't look at him. She looked at the map. So did the pain she answered. It reprioritized itself into graveyards. A ripple of movement in the gallery staffers, shifting jaws, tightening. The kind of unease that creeps in when truth outruns spin. Pete remained unmoved, posture relaxed like none of it touched him, like budget lines couldn't bleed. Jasmine flipped to the next page, a funding timeline. Approved, delayed, frozen. The money didn't vanish. It was pulled, with purpose, from the communities who needed it most by the man who sits across from me now. Pete didn't blink, but he no longer smiled. And in the stillness that followed, millions of veterans and their families watching across the country realized something terrifying. This wasn't mismanagement. This was a decision, and someone made it. Jasmine didn't pause. She turned to the next page like flipping the lock off a loaded chamber. It wasn't just paperwork, it was a weapon, a memo, dated, stamped, initialed by Pete Hegseth himself. The kind of document that doesn't leak unless someone decides silence is no longer survivable. She held it up, high enough for the cameras, low enough to feel personal. Then she began to read, not loud, not fast, but with a precision so cold it chilled the room. Low ROI minority districts is deprioritized. The phrase hit like shrapnel. Sharp, quiet, unforgettable. Every word was a scalpel carving into public trust. Jasmine didn't blink. She kept going. Focus veteran outreach in high-visibility states. Limit resource flow to non-competitive zones. Each line sliced through the illusion of patriotism like a blade through fabric. No one moved. Even the committee members sat rigid, eyes locked to the page, as if afraid looking away would make them complicit. The microphones didn't crackle. They didn't need to. Because this wasn't a speech anymore. It was confession written in ink and arrogance. Jasmine lowered the memo, placed it gently beside the flag. Her voice dropped. This wasn't a clerical error. It wasn't bureaucracy. It was strategy. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You saw suffering, and you saw it didn't poll well, so you budgeted it out of existence. 14,200 veterans left untreated, uncounted, unheard in cities, your map erased in red ink. Pete didn't respond. His jaw tensed. His fingers tapped the table once, then stopped. Because a memo signed in comfort had just become a noose on live television. And the question now wasn't whether it was real. It was how many lives were buried beneath it. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, not when the next document was the sound of impact. She slid it across the table with one hand, slow as a blade. White paper, red stamp, government seal at the top. A single line bolded near the bottom, $32.4 million reallocated from Veteran Equity Division to Office of Strategic Messaging. She looked directly at Pete. This is where the money went. Not to clinics, not to prosthetics, not to counselors, but to a messaging department under your command. Pete didn't flinch, but he leaned into the mic, voice calm, clipped, defensive. For strategic visibility, to support morale, communication matters. Jasmine didn't even blink. You mean ads, she said? You stole care from the people who bled for this country to polish your image in battleground states. The words didn't explode. They corroded, slowly, publicly, permanently. A low shuffle spread through the room, whispers rustling paper, a cough that felt too loud. Pete shifted jaw, flexing. Not from rage, from calculation. This wasn't going his way, and he knew it. Jasmine stood lifted another document. You pulled health care from veterans and funneled it into slogans, while men with missing limbs waited for phone calls that never came. You bought airtime. Pete opened his mouth but stopped, because in that moment he realized something had shifted, not just the narrative. The weight of proof had moved, and it was all on his shoulders. Jasmine didn't press further. She didn't need to, because the folder was still open. The air was still tight, and every camera in the country was about to find out. What if she wasn't the only one in the room who knew the truth? Jasmine didn't speak. She reached into her bag and placed a small black audio device on the table. No explanation, no introduction, just a quiet press of a button, and then a different voice filled the chamber. It wasn't polished, it wasn't political, it was broken. I lost my leg in Ramadi. I still can't sleep through the night without seeing blood in the sand. They told me my case was delayed, that someone would call. That was 2 years ago, I called back. They said they lost my file, said they were sorry. The voice cracked, then paused. A breath. Not the kind that gathers strength, the kind that's trying not to fall apart. I gave everything. And now, I'm just a number they misplaced. The room froze. Staffers looked down. Reporters stopped typing. One man in the gallery quietly wiped a tear from beneath his glasses. Jasmine didn't look at anyone. She kept her eyes on the device like it was sacred. Then Pete leaned into his mic, lips curling into a faint smirk. Trauma exaggerates, he muttered, and added, almost laughing, "Come on, we've heard worse." That was all he said. But it was enough to turn the entire chamber to stone. Ade's jaws clenched. The stenographer's fingers hovered. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in closer, like they needed proof someone actually said it. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her voice came calm, razor sharp. No, trauma remembers. She tapped the device once, letting silence follow. What you just heard was an exaggeration. It was a man bleeding out through a voicemail, because this country forgot how to answer the phone. She looked across the room, not at Pete, but at the veterans watching. And in that moment, millions of Americans knew this wasn't policy failure. This was betrayal with a timestamp. Jasmine didn't sit down. She didn't blink. Her gaze burned through the air, now thick with everything Pete Hegseth had just denied. She stepped forward, voice low, not theatrical, not angry, just deadly precise. That wasn't drama. That's what silence sounds like. The room didn't move. The sentence hung there, clean and brutal. Jasmine let it breathe before continuing, each word clipped like footsteps across a battlefield. His name was Sergeant Malik Thomas, Bronze Star, lost his right leg in Ramadi, came home a hero, then waited 19 months for care that never came. She held up a printed call log, 4 red circles, 4 voicemails. He called your office 4 times, Mr. Secretary. 4. No callback, no case update, just a recorded line that said, your wait time is approximately 6 months. Pete shifted slightly, fingers tightening over his notepad, but he didn't speak. Not this time. Jasmine leaned forward. Her tone didn't rise, but it hit harder. You didn't silence him. You erased him. You made him invisible on purpose. She turned the page. He died waiting in a VA hallway discharge. Papers in one hand, daughter in the other. A collective breath pulsed through the gallery. One reporter lowered their pen. Another stared, eyes glassy at the screen showing Malik's name. Jasmine didn't cry. She didn't have to. The weight in her voice said she'd done that already alone. She turned to Pete again, colder now. You stole his health care. Then you stole his story. And now you sit here like it's inconvenient that we remember. Then she stepped back. The silence returned sharp as broken glass. And the only thing louder than the stillness was the unspoken question filling every corner of the room. How many more names like Malik's had they buried in voicemails? Jasmine didn't give the room time to recover. She turned to the chairman and with flawless composure requested to call a supplemental witness. No one expected it. Not the press, not the staffers, not even Pete. Especially not Pete. The chairman hesitated, then nodded. A tall, pale man stepped into frame. Thin, nervous, wearing a gray suit 2 sizes too big for the weight he carried. He walked to the table, raised his hand, and took the oath, his voice barely rising above the microphone. Name Raymond Ellis, he said. Former Senior Communications Advisor, Office of the Secretary of Defense. Pete's eyes locked onto him like a sniper sighting movement. But Ellis never looked back. He adjusted the mic with shaky fingers and began. I worked under Secretary Hegseth for 14 months. I drafted internal messaging. I sat in the meetings. He paused, swallowed, then detonated. We ignored districts that didn't swing elections. The silence cracked like ice under boots. Even the Republican members stiffened. No spin, no stutter. Just confession. Jasmine stepped beside him, not hovering, guiding. Did anyone object? No, Ellis whispered, then louder. The phrase used in the room was, don't waste resources chasing ghosts. Pete still hadn't spoken. His lips parted once, then nothing. Jasmine nodded once. Cold, controlled. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. He stepped back like a man who just emptied a weight from his chest that had lived there for years. The cameras followed him, but every eye drifted back to Pete. The man who once dominated the room now looked cornered by a truth he thought he buried. Because some ghosts don't fade. Some walk back into the room under oath. And what happens when ghosts start testifying? The room had barely caught its breath when Representative Jamie Raskin leaned toward his microphone, voice calm but heavy like the gavel he was about to summon. Mr. Chairman, he said, eyes locked on Pete. I move to censure Secretary Hegseth for conduct unbecoming of a witness and for violating the dignity of this hearing. The words hit like a quiet grenade. Not loud, but irreversible. Some jaws dropped, some eyes widened. Across the country, millions sat up straighter. This wasn't just drama, now it was discipline. Before the chairman could speak, another voice rang out. Firm. Unexpected. I second the motion, said Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican, a veteran. His face didn't flinch. His voice didn't waver. This isn't partisan. It's moral. A ripple moved through the chamber like a pulse. Jasmine didn't react. She didn't need to. The tide was shifting, and it wasn't hers to push anymore. Pete straightened in his chair, shoulders drawn back like a man preparing for war. You're punishing patriotism, he snapped, eyes darting across the dais. You're censoring a soldier for speaking the truth. But there was no rally, no echo, just silence. Heavy, contained, waiting. Raskin leaned in again, sharper now. You weren't speaking the truth. You were dismantling it. Pete looked around the room for allies. Saw none. His confidence cracked, but his anger didn't. Somewhere in the back, a journalist mouthed the word censure into their phone. Headline engines ignited. Feeds surged. A live vote was coming, and for once, justice might be printed in the official record. Because this wasn't about who shouted loudest anymore. It was about who crossed a line and who finally drew one. Pete Hegseth couldn't contain it anymore. His face flushed, a dangerous red veins rising like fault lines along his neck. He slammed his hand against the table, sending a pen flying, and bellowed with the kind of rage only cornered men knew. You weaponized your grandfather. You turned a soldier into a stunt. Gasps scattered like buckshot across the room. Someone dropped a tablet. A cameraman cursed under his breath, trying to zoom without shaking. Pete's voice echoed off the marble, but it didn't echo back. No one repeated his outrage. No one clapped. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto Pete, not with fire, but with something colder. She studied him for a full second like a surgeon deciding where to make the first cut. Then she stood slowly, and her stare didn't blink. Her tone was steel wrapped in velvet. Controlled. Lethal. You just can't handle a truth that doesn't salute you. The sentence didn't rise in volume. It didn't need to. It sliced. It stayed. And it landed like a flag planted in scorched earth. The chairman raised his gavel. All members present will now vote on the motion to censure Secretary Hegseth. A pause. Then those in favor hands rose. Slowly at first, then in waves. From both sides of the aisle. A few hesitated. Most did not. The screen blinked to life with the tally. 22-9. The word appeared on screen beneath Pete's name, censured. He froze, mouth slightly open, like the air had left the room but refused to take him with it. No more defiance, just disbelief. Outside headlines exploded in real time. Liv Hegseth censured on national TV. Congress draws blood in veteran care scandal. And inside Jasmine sat back down, silent, composed, victorious. Because this wasn't a meltdown. It was a reckoning broadcast in 1080p. The room hadn't moved in 20 seconds, not a cough, not a blink, not a shuffle. Pete's eyes were still locked on the vote count, like it might change if he stared hard enough. But Jasmine, she moved. With deliberate care, she reached into her leather case, unwrapped the velvet bundle, and laid the folded triangle of stars and stripes on the table between them, right in the camera's eyeline. No flourish, no drama, just wait. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lean forward. She simply looked at him and said, You wrapped yourself in it for power. I carry it for remembrance. The line didn't need applause. It landed like silence after a church bell final, ringing true. Pete blinked once, then again. His chest rose, then stalled. For the first time, he looked not like a soldier, not like a pundit, but like a man who didn't know what to say. Behind Jasmine, several veterans in the gallery stood, quietly, no slogans, no signs, just presence. One had his hand over his heart, another saluted. Cameras zoomed in, commentators whispered, Twitter detonated. Jasmine looked down at the flag, ran one thumb gently across the white stitching, like it was the edge of something sacred. This isn't just a symbol, it's a receipt, she murmured, of a debt this country still hasn't paid. Pete opened his mouth, but nothing came. Not anger, not spin, just air. Because the truth had shifted, the power had shifted. And for all his fury, all his headlines, Pete Hegseth had just been dwarfed by a folded triangle of cloth and a granddaughter who refused to forget. But what if this wasn't the final blow? Just the first cut? The camera didn't shake. No anchors spoke. No music swelled. Just the soft crunch of footsteps through Normandy's dew-covered grass and a slow, reverent silence only battlefields remember. Jasmine Crockett walked alone, no entourage, no podium, no flag pin. Just her and a folded triangle wrapped in velvet pressed against her chest like it still carried a heartbeat. The morning fog drifted low, clinging to the graves like memory that refused to fade. She stopped at one headstone. No name, no dates, just the IDPVT. Unknown, 1944. But she knew. She had always known. She dropped to one knee, opened her case, and pulled out a black marker, simple, permanent. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need it. Not anymore. With her hand trembling just enough to betray the years behind it, she wrote 5 words beneath the blank stone. You were always American. The letters weren't elegant, but they were true, and truth had waited long enough. She placed the folded flag beneath the stone, not draped, not staged, laid gently like a gift passed from the dead to the living. The breeze picked up, lifting one corner of the flag just slightly, just enough for it to breathe once, like it remembered home. The fabric fluttered, a silent salute. Jasmine looked up, eyes glass but dry. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it. Some things deserve to fall freely. A crow cried once in the distance. The camera lingered, because for the first time in 78 years, Clarence Crockett was no longer a ghost. He was a name, a story, a reckoning carved in stone. No intro music, no panel, no opinion, just footage. Fox News opened its primetime broadcast not with outrage, but with the full, unedited clip: Jasmine Crockett, kneeling at the grave, writing 5 words with a black marker, her hand steady against the stone. The screen stayed silent. No voiceover, no Chiron, just the sound of Normandy's wind and the rustle of a flag laid at rest. In a studio thousands of miles away, one of their most famously combative anchors sat at his desk. He didn't speak at first. Then, slowly, visibly uneasy, he reached beneath his desk and lifted something into the frame, a folded American flag triangle pointed just like Jasmine's. He didn't unfold it. He didn't preach. He placed it in front of him, hands shaking just enough to betray what the camera caught next. His lip trembled. "Tonight," he said, "I won't argue. I'll just listen." 12 seconds of silence followed, a stillness that swallowed up the usual noise. By morning, the clip had gone viral. Not for its fire, but for its quiet. Liberals shared it with captions like "Finally." Veterans reposted it with "Welcome home, sir." And conservatives, some of them didn't repost at all. They just watched. Maybe twice. Because for the first time, a story hadn't been twisted or shouted over. It had been aired untouched. And in that stillness, the truth didn't need defending. It stood all by itself, folded black-lettered and breathing through a screen. The hearing resumed on a Tuesday. But something was missing. Pete Hegseth's nameplate still stood. His microphone blinked red. But his chair was empty, abandoned, not just by him, but by the noise he used to fill the room with. For a moment, some wondered if he'd show. But Jasmine Crockett already knew the answer. She entered quietly, without notes, without a speech. In her hands, the same folded flag edges, worn now from the places it had traveled: Normandy, the newsroom, the living rooms of millions. She didn't ask for time. She didn't raise her voice. She walked to the vacant chair across from hers and placed the triangle of stars and cotton on Pete's desk. Gently, like laying something down at a grave that had never existed. The room froze, not in fear this time, but in something far heavier. She didn't look at the flag again. She just turned to face the committee and said, almost in a whisper, "I'm done asking to be seen." The silence that followed didn't sting, it ached. Cameras zoomed in on the flag, on the chair, on the place where denial had sat for weeks, shouting over the dead. But now there was only absence, and the weight of what filled it. Pete never returned. The vote to bar him passed quietly. No protest, no spectacle. His name was scratched from the schedule, but not from the shame now sewn into every star of that flag. Because sometimes when the enemy vanishes, all that remains is the echo and the question it leaves behind. What if memory is the loudest justice we have left? The building emptied, but Jasmine stayed. Her heels sat on the marble like punctuation marks at the end of a long, unsparing sentence. Outside, reporters buzzed. But inside, there was only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the flag still folded, still sharp as memory. She opened her phone, not looking for headlines, but for something else. One new email. The subject line: "We saw you." It was from a young soldier, Private Darnell Hughes, age 23, Alabama-born, stationed in Nevada. His message was short. No fanfare. No hashtags. "Ma'am, you made us visible again. My granddad wore his medals under his bed. I'll wear mine in public now." Jasmine blinked. The screen blurred just a second. "That's all." She looked down at the flag again. It no longer felt like an artifact. It felt like evidence of sacrifice, of silence, of systems that dared to forget. And now maybe of something else. Something beginning. She took a breath and hit reply. Not with a press release. Not with a quote for the press. Just 6 words typed slowly, like each one was a name no longer erased. Carry it forward. Eyes open, always. Then she stood, flag in hand, and walked out of the chamber, not in victory, not in vengeance, but in something far rarer, proof. That truth doesn't need permission to rise again. No stage, no anthem, just a chamber that had seen too much silence now, about to witness the weight of words. Jasmine rose slowly, not to grandstand, not to reclaim headlines, just to do what should have been done generations ago. She slid the folder forward, the same deep crimson that once held her grandfather's flag, and spoke into the mic, voice low, but steady like a drum beneath the floorboards. I call it the Crockett Act. She didn't list every clause, she didn't recite policy points like bullets. Instead, she told one story of one man who stormed the beaches of Normandy, died with no name etched in stone, and was nearly lost to a country that benefited from his blood but forgot his name. And then she said what no other member had dared. This is not just a bill, it's an overdue apology in ink. Around her, the room held its breath. The act proposed direct tracking of minority veterans' healthcare access, audits for redirected funds, memorial rights for those denied burial honors due to race. It was legislative fire wrapped in calm. Even C-SPAN didn't cut to commercial. No one clapped. Not yet. But the quiet wasn't absence. It was reverence. It was a chamber too stunned to perform, and for once, that was enough. Jasmine closed the folder, looked straight into the lens, and said, America remembers who it honors, but now we must honor who it forgot. She didn't step back. She leaned in. The room was silent, the lights harsh, and every network feed still rolling live. Jasmine Crockett looked straight into the camera, past the marble walls, past the rows of chairs, past the Capitol itself, and into the living rooms of millions of Americans holding their breath. Her voice was clear, unshaken, final. Whose blood built your country? And why are we still proving it? The words didn't echo. They sank, deep, into the bones of those who'd forgotten and those who'd been forced to remember every day. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She simply stood there steady as the flag now folded before her, asking a question this country has dodged for centuries. No sound from Pete's chair, it was still empty. But in that emptiness, the truth had grown louder than anything else. Behind her, the Crockett Act waited for a vote. In front of her, a nation waited for someone else to speak. No one did. She reached down, touched the edge of the flag, and then gently stepped back. This wasn't about vengeance. It never was. It was about memory, dignity, and a reckoning that didn't need shouting to be felt. Some wounds don't bleed, but they echo through generations. That folded flag wasn't just a keepsake from a soldier. It was evidence of a truth long denied, that black blood helped build this country. It's time we stop just remembering and start acknowledging. Will you stand with history or turn your back on it again? Share this story if you believe sacrifice deserves to be called by its name. If this story moved you, don't scroll away. Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where silence becomes strength and every voice counts. Tap the bell, because the next story might not just reveal the truth, it might reveal us. What part of this story stayed with you? Leave a comment. Let's not just watch. Let's remember together. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to hear it.